Hello everyone, welcome to our presentation. Today we're going to explore the simple present. This is the first slide, and I'm excited to take you through this topic. We'll look at how the simple present tense works and why it's important. Over the next few slides, we'll cover its usage, form, and some examples. So let's get started and make learning fun and easy. Now let's take a look at the contents of this slide. We're going to explore several key areas related to basic verb forms and their usage in English. First, we'll start with some examples to set the stage. Then, we'll dive into forming the simple present tense, which is fundamental for expressing routines and facts. We'll also look at the spelling rules, especially for verbs ending in s and es, which can sometimes be tricky. Next, we'll discuss how to use adverbs of frequency with the simple present, as these help us talk about how often something happens. Moving on, we'll examine questions in the simple present, including yes-no questions and WH questions, to help you form and understand different types of inquiries. We'll also cover the present continuous tense, including its negative form and question forms, which are essential for describing ongoing actions. Additionally, we'll look at verbs that are not used in the present continuous, like state verbs, to clarify common confusions. There's also a section on the spelling of verbs ending in ing, which is important for correct writing. We'll review some irregular verbs, which don't follow standard patterns, and finish with additional practice tips and a conclusion to summarize everything. Throughout this presentation, my goal is to connect these points to give you a clear, comprehensive understanding of these fundamental grammar concepts, so you can use them confidently in your everyday English. Now let's look at the simple form of the verb in the present tense. When we talk about third-person singular subjects like he, she, or it, we add an s to the base form of the verb. For example, we say he sleeps or she likes apples. This s ending is a key feature of the simple present for these subjects. On the other hand, for subjects like I, you, we, or they, we use the base form of the verb without adding an s, for instance. They sleep, or I play tennis every day. It's important to remember that the simple present is a verb tense with only two main forms, one with the s for third-person singular, and one without for all other subjects. Let's look at some examples to see how this works in real sentences. For example, the train leaves at 6 p.m. here. Leaves has the s because the subject train is third-person singular. Or, the sun rises from the east, where rises also has the s. And for subjects like I, we, or they, we stick to the base form. So I play tennis every day, or they like apples. This pattern helps us clearly distinguish between different subjects and how we conjugate the verb in the simple present tense. Let's take a closer look at forming the simple present tense. On this slide, we have a table that highlights some key examples. First, notice the structure. The verb is paired with the subject. For example, when the subject is he, the verb is works, with an added s at the end. This is a typical pattern for third-person singular. When the subject is I, the verb remains in its base form like work without any added endings. The same applies to you, we, and they. They all take the base form of the verb, such as work or do. The most important point here is understanding how the verb changes depending on the subject. For third-person singular, we add an s or es to the verb, while for other subjects, the verb stays in its base form. This pattern is fundamental to forming correct sentences in the simple present tense. Recognizing these patterns helps us communicate clearly and accurately in everyday situations, which is what this presentation is all about. Now, let's look at how we use the simple present tense for different purposes. First, we use it to talk about scheduled events in the near future. For example, the party starts at 8 o'clock. Speakers often use the simple present when discussing public transportation schedules, like buses or trains, but it can be applied to any scheduled event as well. This helps us communicate plans clearly and efficiently. Next, the simple present also indicates facts or generalizations. For instance, we might say, cats like milk. This shows a general truth that is usually true across many situations. It's a way to state facts or beliefs that remain consistent over time. Finally, we use the simple present to express repeated actions. These are habits, routines, or things that happen regularly. For example, I walk to school every day. This usage highlights actions that are habitual or part of a routine. By understanding these key points, scheduled events, facts, and repeated actions, we can see how the simple present tense helps us communicate effectively about various kinds of information in everyday life and in more formal contexts. Today, let's look at some examples of adverbs of frequency in everyday life. He never works on the weekend. This means he always has his weekends free, highlighting how never indicates zero frequency. Next we have, they rarely smoke cigars. Rarely shows that smoking cigars happens very infrequently. Then we sometimes see Susan down at the shops. Sometimes suggests it happens occasionally, not often, but not never either. Moving on, Mr. Smith often goes to the park with his dog. Often indicates this is a common activity for him. Next, Anne usually has toast for breakfast. Usually means it's her typical breakfast choice most of the time. Finally, I always brush my teeth before I go to bed. Always shows this is a routine, something I do every night without fail. These adverbs help us express how frequently certain actions happen, giving us a clearer picture of habits and routines. Now let's look at adverbs of frequency and how they help us describe how often we do things. On this slide, you'll see a table that connects these adverbs with the simple present tense, the subject, and the main verb. First, we have never, which means not at any time or not on any occasion. For example, I never eat breakfast late. Next, sometimes refers to occasions that happen but not all the time, like I sometimes go for a walk in the evening. Then there's usually, which indicates something that happens most days. For instance, I usually read before bed. Moving on, often means many times, so you might say I often listen to music while working. And finally, always signifies every day or at all times, like I always brush my teeth twice a day. It's important to note that adverbs of frequency are placed between the subject and the main verb. For example, in the sentence, I always do my homework. Always comes right after I and before do. Remember, these adverbs help us communicate how regularly something happens, which is key to describing routines and habits clearly. They add precision and help us share our daily patterns effectively. Now, let's look at how we use adverbs of frequency with the verb to be. When we want to talk about how often someone is late, hungry, or friendly, we place the adverb after the verb to be. For example, we say, Ted is rarely late, meaning Ted is not often late. Similarly, Ramon and Frank are often hungry, shows they tend to feel hungry quite a lot. And Tom is usually very friendly, indicates that Tom is generally friendly most of the time. This placement helps us clearly express frequency in a natural way. On the table, you'll see more examples, like Peter is always nice, highlighting how adverbs of frequency fit neatly after the verb to be. Remember, this is a key point because it keeps your sentences accurate and easy to understand when describing habits or characteristics. So, whenever you're talking about how often someone is something, just remember to put the adverb right after the verb to be. Now let's look at how we spell the final S and Es in English. When we add an S to a verb, the pronunciation depends on the ending sound of the base verb. For example, if the verb ends in the sounds F, K, P, or T, we add just plus S, so we say he likes coffee or it sleeps. If the verb ends in the sounds D, G, L, M, N, R, V, or in a vowel, we also add plus S, for instance. He swims or she reads. Now when the verb ends in /ch/, /sh/ s, x, or z, we add plus es to keep the pronunciation smooth. For example, she watches TV, or it finishes at 10 p.m. There's also a special case with verbs ending in a consonant plus y in these. We drop the y and add y's, like he worries a lot. And if the verb ends in a vowel plus y, we simply add plus s, as in she stays at home. Understanding these rules helps us spell and pronounce verbs correctly in the third person singular. It's a key part of mastering English verb forms and ensuring clarity in communication. Now let's look at some examples of irregular verbs and how they change depending on the subject. For instance, when we use he, she, or it, the verb often changes form. Take the phrase has a problem. When we say he has a problem, notice how has is different from have. Similarly, in the next example, I have a job, we use have because we're talking about ourselves. Then moving to the action does the work. When we say he does the work, does is the correct verb form for he, she, or it in the present tense. And for ourselves, I do the work, we use do. Finally, when talking about going outside, he goes outside, with goes for he, she, or it, and I go to work, where we use go. These examples highlight how irregular verbs change form depending on the subject, which is a key point to remember when using verbs correctly in English. This understanding helps us connect verb forms to the overall theme of mastering irregular verbs and improving our language skills. Let's take a look at how we use have got and has got. These expressions are really useful for talking about health, possessions, and relationships. For example, you might say, I have got a cold or she has got a headache. These are common ways to describe how we're feeling or what problems we might have. We also use have got to describe people, places, animals, and things. For instance, she has got black hair or they have got big houses. When it comes to our families and the people we know, we can say, I have got a son or she has got a brother. And finally, have got and has got are used to talk about things we own. Like, I have got a car or she has got a phone. Now on this slide, you'll see a table explaining the difference between singular and plural. For singular, I and you use have got, while he, she, and it use has got. For plural, you, we, and they all use have got. Remember, have got and has got are very common in everyday English, and they help us talk about health, possessions, and relationships in a simple, clear way. Now, let's talk about how we form yes or no questions in the simple present tense. We use do or does to make these questions. An important point is that we always use the base form of the verb after do or does. For example, if we're asking about actions in the negative, we say, no, they do or we don't. When asking questions affirmatively, we say, yes, I do or you do. Looking at the structure, we have the question form, do or does followed by the subject, then the base verb. For subjects like I, we, you, and they, we use do. For he, she, or it, we use does. So, for example, do I work, or does he work? Remember, the key points are, use do or does at the start, follow with the subject, and then the base form of the verb. This structure helps us clearly ask yes-no questions in the simple present tense. When do you usually get up? This is a great example of a question, using the simple present tense. Notice that in questions with frequency adverbs like usually, the adverb comes after the subject. So if I ask, you usually get up at 7, and I want to turn that into a question, I move the adverb after the subject, making it, do you usually get up at 7? Now, let's look at how we form questions with question words. For example, what do they do? Here, what is the question word, and it comes before do. Similarly, if we want to ask about someone's residence, we say, where does he live? Notice how the question word, where, is placed at the beginning, followed by does because the subject is he. Remember, when using do or does, the main verb stays in its base form. These question forms are essential for asking about habits and routines in the simple present tense. Understanding where to put the question word and how to use do or does helps us ask clear, correct questions in English. This is a key part of mastering the simple present for everyday communication. Now let's look at how we form the present continuous tense. It's quite straightforward. We start with the present of the verb to be, which is am, is, or are. Then we add the base verb plus ing. For example, I am working. When we talk about he, she, or it, we use is like he is working. And for subjects like they, we, or you, we use are, as in they are working. This structure helps us describe actions that are happening right now or around this moment. Remember, the key points are the correct form of to be and the base verb plus ing. This tense is essential because it connects to the overall theme of expressing ongoing actions in English. Now let's take a closer look at how we spell verbs ending in ing. As you can see in the table, there are some common rules to remember. For example, when a verb ends in a consonant plus e, like dance or come, we drop the e and add ing. So dance becomes dancing, and come becomes coming. Another important rule applies when the verb has a consonant preceded by a single vowel, like sit, show, or fix. In these cases, we double the final consonant before adding ing, making sit into sitting, show into showing, and fix into fixing. However, if the verb ends in w, x, or y, the spelling stays the same and we just add ing. For example, show becomes showing and fix becomes fixing. When it comes to verbs like eat and sleep, which end in two vowels followed by a consonant, we do not double the consonant. So, eat turns into eating and sleep into sleeping. Lastly, for most other verbs, simply add ing. For instance, talk becomes talking and read becomes reading. Understanding these rules helps us spell verbs correctly in the ing form and keeps our writing accurate and professional. So let's look at some examples. You are not sleeping, and he is not working. Notice how in the negative form of the present continuous, we simply add not after the verb to be and keep the ing form of the main verb. This is a key point to remember. To form the negative, it's really straightforward. Just insert not after to be, and the rest stays the same. This structure helps us clearly express what is not happening at the moment. Keep in mind, this is very useful when you want to describe actions that are not ongoing right now. So, whenever you're forming negatives in the present continuous, remember, not after to be plus the verb with ing. Now let's look at how we form yes or no questions in the present continuous tense. When we want to ask a question, we start with the appropriate form of the verb to be, that is, am, is, or are, depending on the subject. For example, if the subject is I, we use am, and then add the base verb plus ing to form the question, like, am I working? If the subject is he, she, or it, we use is, and then the verb with ing, such as is he working? And for you, we, or they, the correct form is are, followed by the base verb plus ing, like are they working? So the key points here are, always match the correct form of to be with your subject, and then add the verb with ing. This structure helps us ask clear yes or no questions in the present continuous tense, which is very useful for asking about ongoing actions right now. So, what am I drinking? Well, I am drinking tea. Now, let's think about the questions we often ask when we're trying to learn more about something. We use questions like where, what, why, when, how, and who. These are the key question words that help us gather detailed information. In the context of the present continuous tense, these WH questions are very useful because they allow us to ask about actions happening right now. For example, I might ask, what am I drinking? To find out more about the current action. Or if you see someone doing something, you could ask, who is that? Or where are they? The important thing to remember is that these questions are essential for forming sentences in the present continuous tense, especially when you're asking about actions that are happening at this very moment. They help us connect the tense to real-life situations and deepen our understanding of how to describe ongoing actions. So, as we move forward, keep in mind how these WH questions are not just about asking for facts. They're a way to explore and describe the world around us in real time. Now let's look at some common non-action verbs. For example, Julia is having a cup of tea. Notice that we're not saying Julia is having in the present continuous because have in this context describes a state or possession, not an action in progress. Similarly, Julia has a car, again, a state, not an action happening right now. When we think about our senses, see, smell, taste, we're describing experiences or perceptions which are also non-action verbs. We might say, I see the sky, or I smell coffee. But these aren't actions we're doing at that moment. They're states or perceptions. Then there are verbs like believe, hate, have, hear, know, like, remember, and think. These are all verbs that express mental or emotional states, not actions in progress. For example, I believe in kindness or I think it's going to rain. These verbs are generally not used in the present continuous tense because they refer to a state of mind or feeling, which is more static. So the key point here is that these non-action verbs describe states or conditions. They help us understand that not all verbs can or should be used in the present continuous tense. Recognizing this distinction is important for correct grammar and clear communication, especially when expressing feelings, perceptions, or possession. Now let's wrap things up with slide 20. The simple present tense has two forms, and understanding these is key to using it correctly. First, when we talk about routines or habits, we usually use the simple present with adverbs of frequency. These adverbs, like always, never, often, or sometimes, typically come between the subject and the verb. For example, she always drinks coffee in the morning. The second form is used with the verb to be. When the verb to be is in the simple present, the adverbs of frequency come after it. So we would say, he is often late, or they are never busy. Recognizing where to place these adverbs really helps make your sentences clear and natural. Overall, understanding these two forms and the placement of adverbs of frequency helps you communicate routines and states effectively. It ties back to our goal of mastering basic tense structures for everyday conversations. Now, let's look at some helpful resources to practice what we've learned about adverbs of frequency. On the first link, you'll find a comprehensive guide that explains how to use adverbs of frequency correctly. It covers common placements and variations, making it a great reference for practice. The second link offers exercises specifically focused on adverbs of frequency, allowing you to test your understanding and improve your skills. The third resource provides additional practice exercises, which are excellent for reinforcing your learning in a fun and interactive way. Remember, consistent practice is key to mastering these concepts, so I encourage you to explore these links and keep practicing regularly. This will help you speak more confidently and accurately in English.